Hello everyone. So today I'll be speaking about syntax as another branch in linguistics. So the majority of students seem to be confused about syntax, and they think that syntax is grammar and grammar is syntax. However, syntax is just one component of grammar, in addition to other, of course, components like phonology, which is the study of the sound pattern, like, for instance, morphology, which is the study of word formation. So an important characteristic of syntax is that all languages, though they are different, but all of them have syntax. All of them have word order, which is not completely free, right, as we will see later. But words are, of course, combined in restrictive ways. Another characteristics of syntax is universality. So grammar are alike in fundamental ways, in that we will see that words are not just strings of words, but actually and basically they are grouped into constituents. So as usual, with my students, I have the habit to recapitulate what we did in the preceding weeks in order to refresh the minds of the students and to refresh my mind myself. So here I would start with an activity that I provided last time about morphology, right? Just as I told you to recapitulate what we did last week. So here the activity, I have 6 exercises. I have number 1, what's a morpheme, right? So we defined what is a morpheme, right? And then you have to explain the distinction between free morpheme and bound morpheme. We said that free morpheme is a morpheme that stands by itself, and the bound morpheme is the opposite. It's a morpheme that cannot stand by itself. A bound morpheme, like for instance, we said the plural s, the third person singular s, the past participial en, the superlative of the adjective est, and the free morpheme, like house, like laptop, like teacher, right? So many other free morphemes, of course, that can stand by themselves. Here I have number 3, underline the bound morphemes in the following words. We have books, we have previewer, we have fearlessly, and we have happier. And I move directly to number 4 to answer number 3. Here we said define the base, the prefix, and the suffix. So the base in books is a book, the base in previewer is view, and the base in fearlessly is fair, and the base in happier is happy. The prefix in books, we don't have a prefix, but we have a suffix s. Previewer, we have both prefix and suffix. We have pre as a prefix, and we have er as a suffix. Fearlessly, we have, of course, the suffix, the double s, the e, double s, l, and y, and the same for happier. We have, of course, the suffix ier, right? And number 5, we have segment the following words into morphemes, and you have to identify the base, the prefix, and the suffix. So the same thing with unlikely, with saltly, with displeased, with player. And I guess that it's already done by you. And the last one is define the processes of inflection, derivation, and compounding. And remember that we dealt with all the morphological processes, inflectional morphology, right, which is, of course, a rule that inflects the words with, for instance, the third person singular s, with the plural s, and so and so. The derivational morphology, which is, of course, a bound morpheme that we add to a free morpheme in order to derive new words, like for instance we have to play, player, like for instance we have likely, unlikely, or like, and we add, of course we add both the prefix n and the ly to derive a new word, unlikely. And of course we have compounding. We have cited many morphological rules. Today we will be talking about another branch of linguistics, as I said, which is called syntax. And syntax, I guess, it's the major and the most important component in grammar and especially in linguistics. We will see why. So let us look at the definition, or just a brief definition about syntax. It is divided as the arrangement of words and phrases in a language to create a well-structured or well-formed sentence. So we say that the smallest unit of phonology is the sound, the smallest unit of morphology is the morpheme. So the same for syntax. When we speak about the smallest units of syntax is the sentence, okay? So the syntax is the arrangement, right, grouping of words into well-structured and well-formed sentences. Here I'm speaking about well-structured and well-formed sentences. And the example I have here at hand is I have three sentences that are accounted as ungrammatical because, of course, the words are not well formed and the words are not well grouped. Let me read them. I have flying the bird in the sky. In the sky, flying is the bird, and flying the bird in the sky is. So you may guess just from these examples that the words are not well grouped, okay, and the arrangement, okay, of words is not well structured. Of course, by contrast or in contrast, I have the green example, which is the bird is flying in the sky, which is of course a perfectly well-formed sentence because it respects, of course, the syntactic rules of a particular language. So we may say that the study of syntax covers essentially the study of the way meaningful elements are organized in a sentence. So in other words, a syntactic analysis deals with the external arrangement as opposed to the internal structure of words within, of course, the boundaries of a sentence. And just to your knowledge, please, here I'm providing you with examples from English, but as I told you, what is important about syntax is its universality, meaning that all languages, right, though they are different, they have syntax. Okay, right. So an important issue here about syntax is what does it mean to have a syntactic knowledge? What does it mean for instance, a native speaker, right, to have a syntactic knowledge about his mother tongue? So to have a syntactic knowledge means, number one, it means that you understand, you have the skill, you have the capacity, the ability to understand and to produce an infinite number of sentences they never heard before, right? I saw the boy, I saw the intelligent boy. Yesterday I saw the intelligent boy playing in the garden. Yesterday I met the intelligent boy with his friends playing in the garden. So here, of course, I can extend my sentence to an infinite number of sentences, meaning that I can modify words and at the same time I can insert sentence inside another sentence to produce an infinite number of sentences. And this is what is really important about syntax. So having a syntactic knowledge, meaning having also the ability to determine the grammatical relations in a sentence. Look at this example, please. I have Mary hired Bill versus, right, Bill hired Mary, right? So here we have two interpretations indeed, because Mary in the first sentence functions as the subject, while it functions in the second sentence as the complement or the object. The same thing for Bill. In the first sentence, it functions, or the noun Bill, the proper name noun Bill, function as the complement in the first sentence, while it is indeed the subject in the second sentence. So here we have, right, this ability to determine the grammatical relations that hold between words in a particular sentence. Having a syntactic knowledge meaning also having a knowledge about the word order, right? So as you know, each language has its own word order. And of course, we speak about word order variation when we speak about different languages. For instance, we say that English is an SVO language. Standard Arabic, we may have a free word order in the sense that we may have an SVO or a VSO, right? So it depends on particular languages. Another property of syntactic knowledge is agreement, right? So having a syntactic knowledge also having the ability to determine the agreement in a particular sentence. Agreement between a subject and a verb, a determiner and the noun and the pronoun, etc. I may just go back to my example about Mary hired Bill, and I use it in a simple present. For instance, I may say Mary hired Bill. So here we may guess that the sentence is ungrammatical because there is no agreement between the subject and, of course, the verb. So the grammatical one should, or to achieve agreement, we should say, of course, Mary hires Bill. Another important property of syntactic knowledge is called hierarchical structure. So here, the same as just the example I provided for the first, hierarchical structure meaning that having the ability to know exactly which word may modify which word. For instance, we all know in English that the adjective should be placed before the noun, okay? The adverb most of the time after the verb, okay? So we do have this ability because we know exactly what are the syntactic rules in English, and of course we do have this ability vis-a-vis our mother tongue. So here I cannot, I may say that it's not impossible, but I think that it's not legitimate for anyone to explain, right, syntax without going back to the famous example which was coined by Chomsky. Colorless green ideas sleep comfortably. That's why I deem it important and interesting for you as students to try to understand syntax via this example. So colorless green ideas sleep comfortably, and I provided you with other two examples. A verb crumples the milk, and I gave the question an angry egg. So at first we may say that these sentences, of course, are grammatically correct. They are actually understandable sentences. They are actually they respect the hierarchical structure of sentences, and the combination or the grouping of words is respected in the sense that I may say here, for instance, if I take the first sentence, colorless green ideas, I have two adjectives preceding the noun ideas, and I have an adverb following the verb sleep and modifying, of course, the verb sleep. But still, what's striking about these examples is that they don't have they don't have any meaning, they don't have any sense, meaning that we can say that they are meaningless, but at the same time we say that they are perfectly well-formed sentences. And the proof is that when we say comfortably sleep ideas, green, colorless, milk, the cramped verb, and the question I gave egg, angry, I feel that these sentences are the sentences that are considered as ungrammatical sentences. So what does it mean right here? It means that, and I guess this is an important element in or about syntax, is that words are not just simple strings of words, but actually they have hierarchical structure, and syntax is dealing or is interested in this hierarchical structure, and of course in the way words are grouped together to form perfectly well-formed sentences. Let me now move to syntactic categories. We cannot speak about syntax without speaking about syntactic categories. And here I may say that syntactic categories are, of course, word-level categories and phrase-level categories. So here I need your attention, please, because when I speak about word-level categories, I speak about nouns, okay, any noun. I speak about any verb, just verb. I speak about any adjective, adverbs, and so on. But when I speak about phrase-level categories, I speak about those or word-level categories, let me say nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs that may be expanded into phrases, of which they become heads. For instance, I would say company is a noun, is a word-level category. When I say a company is a phrase-level category where a company functions as the head. A large company here, as you may notice, I'm expanding, right, my word-level category to a phrase-level category, and I put an indefinite article a, I insert even an adjective, and I say a large company. That large company. So how these phrase-level categories are represented. So I may say that, for instance, for this NP, the representation is as follow. I have an NP, right, or a noun phrase, right, and I have determiner A and N. And you may notice that both determiner and A are between parentheses, meaning that they are optional. What does it mean? It means that a phrase-level category indeed may have just one head, we may speak about a phrase-level category, but only when we have, or just when we have one head, meaning the N here, right? So the NP may be a personal noun, may be a pronoun, may be an NP followed by a sentence, like the example, the fact that you are here. So this is how we do represent, of course, phrase-level category, right? But here you may ask me, what do you mean by a phrase and what do you mean by a constituent? So intuitively, a constituent or phrase, they are used interchangeably, right? So you don't have to be confused about that. It's a group of words which belong together in a sentence. So they are usually coherent by themselves, meaning that when taken out of the context of the sentence, right, a company, right, a company, a large company, this is a phrase, this is a constituent, and make a coherent contribution to the meaning of the sentence as a whole. And here, as you may notice, I have three examples. The dog ate the bone. So here I have different, right? I have the dog, and I have, which is a noun phrase. I have ate the bone, which is a verbal phrase, where I have another noun phrase, the bone. I have the president of the company likes to see big profits. So the president, which is a noun phrase, and I have of the company, which is also a prepositional phrase, which is inserted inside the noun phrase. So here I can expand, of course, my sentences, adding other phrases and constituents. Okay, let me give you another example with the VP phrase. So a VP phrase, normally its head is a V. Like an NP, we say the head of the NP is N, the head of PP is a P, the head of adjectival phrase is an A. Okay, the head of the adverbial phrase in an A, right? The same. The head for the VP is, of course, a V. And this verb may optionally be followed by an NP, right, an AP, an adverbial phrase, a PP, or an S. But what is essential here is that a VP has a head which is called the verb, right? So we say here, for instance, John slept. So, right, a verbal phrase here has the head V. John wrote an article, right? We have a VP followed by a head, right, or headed by a head V, and this head V is followed by another phrase called noun phrase. And John wrote an article about coronavirus. So here, of course, we have a VP, which includes, of course, or which is headed, right, by a verb, and then, of course, followed by another noun phrase, which is also followed by another prepositional phrase, which is about coronavirus. So, what's a significant aspect of these categories is their universality. And remember I said that at the beginning. What's really important about syntax is the universality of syntax. Like to say, all languages have syntax, and all languages have this representation of phrases and constituents. So it seems that languages tend to have all these categories, which actually allows the formulation of syntactic rules and the representation of the hierarchical structure of sentences. So here I move to phrase structure rules. What do you mean by phrase structure rules? Right, phrase structure rules are the rules that determine what goes on into a phrase, into a constituent, okay? So we've been dealing with phrases and constituents, and for instance, we provided examples with NPs, with VPs, okay? But the question here is how they are represented, or how this hierarchical, right, or hierarchy, right, as far as phrases and constituents are concerned, is achieved. So it is achieved through phrase structure rules, okay? So how these constituents are ordered. So the general schema is we have X, Y, and Z, where X consists of Y followed by Z, which means that we cannot have Z followed by Y and then followed by X. But when we have this X, Y, Z, we have this general schema X consists of Y followed by Z. The example, a little boy in a bubble, and not, for instance, in a little bubble boy, right? Okay, that would violate, of course, the general schema of the phrase structure rule. So the phrase structure rule for NPs is that we have determiner, we have an adjective, right, the little, and we have the noun boy, and we have in a bubble, which is, of course, a prepositional phrase. So as an illustration that phrase structure rules are capable of generating syntactically correct but semantically incorrect sentences, phrase structure rules break sentences down into pieces, into their constituent parts. And these constituents are often represented as tree structures. So syntax trees, right, are a neat graphic tool to chart sentence structure and make sense of the word order of a particular language. Okay, let me give you this example of the tree diagram. Okay, here the constituent structure of sentences can be represented in essentially two ways, but most linguists, of course, prefer the first way. Okay, it is through or by means of labeled tree diagrams. Okay, or by means of labeled just brackenings. Okay, but as I told you, most linguists prefer, of course, the first one. So what's you know that we want, when we want to draw, right, a tree, we start from the down to bottom. But what's different here is that when we want to draw a tree, right, for a constituent structure of a sentence, we start from top, of course, down to down, okay, from top to down. So here we have, for instance, my brother bought an expensive car. We have the S, it is a sentence, right, which have two labels and branches, of course, to different elements. We have the NP, and this NP, or the noun phrase, is also branched to a determiner and the noun. The determiner is my and the noun is brother. The VP, or the verbal phrase, is also branched to a head verb, which is both, and to another NP, which is in turn branched to a determiner, an adjectival phrase, and the noun an expensive car, determiner N, the adjective expensive, and the noun car. Okay, so as I told you, this constituent structure of sentence can be also represented by means of labeled brackenings. So for instance, this example may have the following representation. We may have S followed by an NP, followed by a determiner, the noun, the VP, followed by the head verb, the NP, the determiner, the adjective, followed by the head A, and the noun, the car. So the two ways of representation are logically equivalent. However, tree diagrams, yes, that's why I say that most linguists prefer tree diagrams, because they help visualize structure better than bracketing do. So tree diagrams, we may say, are the uprooted trees with branches and nodes, and the nodes in a tree diagram are the topmost points, okay, the bottom points, and all those intermediate points here, you may notice here, right, at which the tree branches, they form a higher VP, okay? And I hope I didn't create a confusion in your mind about this example, because I hope that it clarifies this, the representation about the constituent structure of sentences, okay? Now, you may ask me, but what's the functions, okay, or what may be the functions of phrase structure rules? I have different functions, okay? So a tree diagram represents several aspects of how words are put together in a sentence. Number one, we may say, yes, it tells us about the order of the words in a sentence, okay? Also, we have a notion about the word class, the parts of speech of each word, whether it is a VP, whether it is an NP, a PP, an AP, right? Okay, so we have a notion, of course, about the word class, the parts of speech of the word class, okay? And number three, also, we have a notion about the hierarchical structure of a sentence, right? The grouping of words into phrases and the grouping of phrases into larger phrases, okay? The hierarchical structure, which elements may modify another element. For instance, we say the indefinite article is usually preceding the noun and cannot follow the noun, okay? The adjective precedes. So here we say which elements, yes, is grouped with another element to, of course, derive a perfectly well-formed phrase, a constituent, and a constituent and a phrase may be, of course, added to other phrases to derive well-formed sentences, okay? So they reflect, as we say, the kind of syntactic knowledge. Yes, indeed, we may say that phrase structure rules reflect our syntactic knowledge, yes, of a language that we possess, okay? And they are extremely powerful in the sense that they allow the generation of an unlimited number of sentences in a language. When we speak about phrase structure rules, we speak about an unlimited. You can expand the phrases, the constituent, while still, of course, respecting this hierarchy in order to generate perfectly well-formed sentences, okay? So here I may conclude this class by saying that there are three elements in generative grammar, as of course proposed by Chomsky: senses, competence, components, right? Senses, we speak about creativity. Native speakers should be capable to create new sentences, and it is done through syntax. Language should not only be learned by imitation, but by principles of abstraction. The principle is innate, inborn. And here I may refer, I think that we already dealt with that, the language acquisition device. We say that Chomsky assumed that the born babies are predisposed by this language acquisition device, of course, to acquire the language without being exposed to any formal context or without being coached or by any instructor or any coach, right? Competence, the second element in generative grammar is competence. So some sentences are grammatically correct, like for instance we say the table saw the woman, but the sentence is grammatically correct, but it doesn't have or doesn't make sense. And here I can go back to my or to the famous example, of course, coined by Chomsky, right? Here, some are ungrammatical, right? You feel that something is missing. When you say, for instance, John puts the car, so you feel that something is missing in this sentence, of course, which is, of course, the location. So it is your competence, right, that you have this innate competence that you have about language, which, of course, tells you that something is missing in example number 2, and which tells you that number one is grammatical, though of course it is meaningless. The third example is put John in the garage the car. Of course, here my competence about the word order, I say here that the grouping of words is wrong. So we have, as a result, I have a wrong word order. And the third element is about components. The components is just what we have just been dealing with, the phrase structure components. The rule is needed, and the syntactic tree is also needed. So I may say thank you very much for listening, and see you next.